Each year, Microsoft Research hosts hundreds of influential speakers from around the world, including leading scientists, renowned experts in technology, book authors, and leading academics, and makes videos of these lectures freely available.
About a year now, yeah. Be between, and Greg keeps flipping things around. So Greg Quinn and then Blair Jennings and Mark Miller chat about some of the aspects of what the project's doing, what they're trying to actually attempt to do in using some of the both emerging technologies and also having a rich client for targeting for scientists and even other disciplines that could actually utilize it in the kind of extensible model within it. So I'll leave that to Greg and the team to actually fill in the details. So.
Okay, so it's great to be presenting here at Microsoft Research. As Dan said, my name is Greg Quinn. I work in the Integrated Biosciences group at San Diego Supercomputer Center, where I work on the Encyclopedia of Life project. What I'm going to be talking about today is the SDSC Notebook project, which I have to say wouldn't even be happening without the support of Microsoft Research and particularly Dan Fay. So, a big vote of thanks to those folks.
Yeah, I heard I got it
Okay. Okay, so the Notebook project actually falls under the auspices of the Synthesis Center at the San Diego Supercomputer Center, and this is a group who is involved with nurturing cutting-edge and new projects for use in the scientific community. And so also thanks to them for supporting us. So the way this presentation is going to go, you're actually getting 3 for the price of 1 today. So I'm going to talk first about the project overview. Then Blair will talk about some of the technicalities of the project and how it relates to the .NET development paradigm. And finally, Mark Miller will be talking about the biodiversity field notebook and how that builds on the work of the notebook project. So I'm going to cover a bunch of issues today, such as problems of data overload for researchers, a question about repurposing data that's obtained from websites, some issues about the interfaces that researchers are presented with, the overall goals of the Notebook project, and finally a very brief demonstration about with the Notebook itself. Actually, I just noticed we don't have an internet connection here.
You can turn on the wireless.
Oh, okay, okay.
Actually,
I think it's
you got it.
Okay. Okay, well, we'll see just how connected we are when we try it. Okay, so first off, let me talk about the Encyclopedia of Life project, because this is really where the Notebook project sprung from. The Eol Project, Encyclopedia of Life, EOL, is a project to provide annotation for the more than, for the thousands of protein sequences that are currently publicly available. These are generated from the genomic sequencing projects. Currently, more than 800 genomes have been completely or partially sequenced, and the data is publicly available for these protein sequences. What EOL attempts to do is to provide domain-based annotation for each of the protein sequences. So what we're doing is we're throwing a huge amount of data at end users, potentially, for each genome that they obtain data from. And when I was first pitching the data interface side of the EOL project, there were actually 3 components that I pitched. One was that there would be a web interface, which is a fairly standard thing for scientific data sites. The second was that there will be a web services interface, which 3 or 4 years ago was somewhat new. Nowadays it's fairly common, SOAP-based web services. And thirdly, that there will be a client-side application to enable users to manage the huge amount of data that we were potentially throwing at them. And this was then called the EOL Notebook. It's now called the SDSC Notebook, because what we discovered was that the problem of sort of data management was a problem not just restricted to the EOL project, but also to the many excellent websites available on the internet, such as XPASI, the Protein Data Bank PDB site, which is hosted at Supercomputer Center, to the NCBI NIH website, which provides huge amounts of sequence information. There are other issues as well, not just the question of how much data we throw at people. The BLAST program is a program that compares a protein or DNA sequence with a database of protein and DNA sequences. And the NIH, via the NCBI site, provides a really quite excellent service for performing BLAST searches. There's a web page that the researcher pastes the protein sequence or DNA sequence in. They press the button. At the other side, on the NCBI servers, the sequence is compared with a huge database, several million sequences of protein or DNA sequences, and the data is returned to the end user. The end user can retrieve the data in a variety of formats, including XML, ASN format, and most commonly in web format, because that's the easiest way of scanning the data to see exactly what hits you've found. The problem with this is that what comes back is formatted text. It's not data per se that can be easily assimilated by a computer. How could you easily manipulate the information that's on the page? For example, if you have a line that's, say, 80 characters, how could you make that 100 characters easily? Well, I can think of ways of doing that using dynamic HTML plugins, but there's no inherent way of doing that through the basic web page.
So, Greg, none of this is secured, is that correct? So this is just HTTP, not TTPS.
The BLAST service?
All of the NCBI BLAST searches, correct?
That's not correct, actually. They were actually, at one point, they actually were running an HTTPS service, but I'm not sure if they still do that.
They haven't done that in a couple of years.
Right.
Well, I asked because a couple of the commercial folks that I've chatted with, we've had these sorts of discussions, and part of what they've come back with is that they don't want to run queries against public databases,
right,
because people could then reverse.
They actually have a subscription with the NCBI to basically pull it into
their local, right? Right.
Well, yes, I mean, right, and in fact, the entire web service, in fact, the entire website that we're looking at here can be downloaded for internal use in the company. All the data sets are freely available. So, you know, I've worked in biotech companies, and typically what they'll do is they'll just simply import the entire data set locally and run BLAST searches.
It's not that big, right?
GenBank.
The database behind BLAST, right? These databases are like gigabytes.
GenBank is, yeah, I mean, GenBank is quite large. The NR.
Last time I looked, which was like 6 months ago, it was 2 terabytes.
2 terabytes, okay.
For GenBank. The GenBank, right. The protein sequence database, non-redundant database, is not that large physically, but it contains something like 3 million sequences, something like that. So this leads to the question of data overload. And this guy here has serious data overload. In fact, his head's about to explode. So there are questions about how do you meaningfully store data from online sites? How do you share data? Say, for example, you have data that you found online that is relevant to a group of researchers in the research group. How can you share this between users? How do you keep track of data that you've generated during a web session? How do you manipulate it? How do you repurpose it? Say you've done a BLAST search. How do you feed that into another program, say a program that does multiple sequence alignment? How do you annotate it? There's no easy way to annotate a web page. There are mechanisms, but there's no simple, basic way. So, so there are several issues here. Let's look at how do you locally store web data. There's currently no meaningful way to store scientific web pages from various different sources. How do you search it? Say, for example, you want to search a group of BLAST results. You say to your computer, show me all vertebrate hits. Well, your computer doesn't have any understanding of the actual meaning of the data contained in a web page. So it's not that simple to actually deal with. Repurposing information. The semantic web is an initiative originally of Tim Berners-Lee at the W3C organization to provide more meaning to information that's available online. And this is a very laudable initiative. At the moment, it's very much in its infancy, so there's still a way to go. Most web pages are not marked up semantically, so this is something that will for sure happen, but it's a few years away from now. Thirdly, how do you better present data? The web page has absolutely revolutionized the way that researchers obtain data, and group service providers such as those of us at Supercomputer Center provide data to end users. It's a great way of disseminating information. It's not necessarily the best way of displaying data, though. Say, for example, you have a protein structure. How do you easily display that on a web page without employing third-party presentation modules? So there are a number of issues here, and the SDSC Notebook is an attempt to address these issues. Its aim is to provide a means of managing data for knowledge workers and researchers. And we came up with a list of features that we would like to see implemented in the notebook that obviously leverage the features, the inherent power of Windows, .NET development environment. At its core, it has a database. So at the very minimum, the application is a way of storing data. It would have a knowledge of data types that it handles, so it will do this transparently. The user would not be required to provide too much intervention in this. It would have the ability to annotate data. You'd have the ability to share data between different users. And the data that's kept, and this is very important, it's not enough to store data. Data must be kept up to date, and there needs to be a mechanism for updating the data in the background. There will be a plugin API for developers to be able to use the notebook application as a development framework. And the application would most definitely support the new breed of PCs, such as tablet PCs, with the remarkable new interface and the data type. So what we have, yeah.
When you said database, that covers a wide range of things, and I'm curious what you think a database is. Are you thinking a relational database,
in this instance,
object-oriented database?
Right.
In this instance, it's SQL Server 2005.
Right. So what we're storing here is it's basically a data store for XML documents.
Okay.
Currently.
And when you say local,
local as in desktop,
on their personal machine,
right,
or local to the organization.
So this is something that's on the desktop PC.
Got it.
It's using the SQL Express.
Personal version, great, thanks.
Okay.
Yeah. So what Blair will sort of
Today, but you're going to expand that to the enterprise version.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through an overview of this. Blair will be able to fill you in with the details about the technicalities in his presentation. So what we're effectively trying to do here is if you like, create a bastardized version of the connected office that Microsoft promotes. And in this connected research environment, the researcher is able to access data from a variety of sources, would be they a regular website, SOAP services, or other data sources, which could be legacy data, could be files, flat files. They're able to load those into the notebook application. They're able to input information also into the application. They're able to annotate the information. And most importantly, they're able to share the information with other members of a research group. And also, most importantly, they're able to export the information for use in, for example, research papers and publications. So what we have is the sort of basic components of the notebook solution, if you like. We have a graphical user interface. And through this interface, we're able to both store and retrieve data that's kept in the local data store. The interface is also the point at which the end user visualizes data from online data sources. The user is able to share data with other users using peer-to-peer communication, creating, if you like, a virtual data collaboratory. And another component is a toolbar that takes data from a sort of so-called legacy type interface, which is the web, and is able to import that into the local data store. And the reason for this is because the web isn't going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be around for some time. So we feel that we need to find some mechanism for easily importing data contained in web pages into the local data store. So this is the prototype browser interface that we have for the notebook application. On the right, we have a large data display area. And this is actually composed of a XAML control that loads XAML pages. And I'll talk about that in a second. On the left, we have a tree control that allows the user to drill down into data that's stored locally. Data that's clicked on is then displayed in the data display area. There is a listing of the so-called smart or rich clients that can be loaded into the XAML control. And this might be for information sites such as the PDB or EOL or whatever. We have a visualization control that indicates who is currently connected to a research collaboration group. And then at the very bottom, we have a mechanism for just simply doing fast queries. And there will be a more complex query interface as well. So there's a variety of mechanisms for importing information into the personal data store, but the lingua franca of the application is currently XML. So information data is imported either directly from an XML document, it's imported either through the web browser toolbar or through scripting, and I'll talk about the toolbar in a second, or through a smart client or through some of the unattended update facilities. The internally, probably, well, without doubt, the most complex aspect of the application is how we map data internally. It's the most interesting, it's also the most complex, and it's something that we're still working on. But what I will say is that the application, in practice, will effectively have an understanding of the data types that it's handling through the use of domain-specific ontologies. We are working to create an application that can load OWL-based ontologies according to the sort of W3C spec. And where a data type is not recognized or it's ambiguous, then the user will be prompted for further input. The web browser toolbar is sort of fairly straightforward. The idea is that a developer can create a parser for a particular web page quite easily, actually using Perl. And for this, we use the active state Perl engine that will be distributed with the application as part of the download, part of the installation, rather. Where a web page is recognized by the toolbar through the use of, say, a 20-line signature, initial signature of the web page, a button appears that allows you to pass that data, and it's then input into the local data store. This is sort of an overview of the components involved in the smart client development framework. So, as I mentioned, the sort of core to this is a XAML control, and we have been using a variety of different controls, including MyXAML, Xamlon, which is from the local San Diego company. We're now using the one from the Avalon CTK, which seems to be working great. And we have a service manager that looks for activity on the graphical user interface. It looks for activity in the service wrappers, and the service wrappers are the interface between data services and the application. And a resource manager handles storing and retrieving data from the local data store, and when we implement it, it will handle the peer-to-peer communication layer as well. So effectively what we have is an application that when you click on one of the smart clients, the application just simply loads the XAML associated with it into the XAML control, and the associated code behind business code is loaded at the same time, of course. And that application has full access to the resources of the notebook application. So it can access data online, it can store data according to an API. One of the things that the notebook will be installing when it installs the basic application is a runtime service. And among the things that the runtime service will do is to periodically query the database for data that can be updated, for which there's a pathway for updating it. So, for example, a blast search for a particular protein is current for the time that you search the database. A few days later or a few weeks later, it's not a current search. Therefore, in the background, it's quite easy to envisage a situation where the application would query the NCBI servers, do the blast search, update the data that's stored locally, and notify the user that there's new data. So the runtime service will query the local data store for data that can be updated, and it will activate either the appropriate service wrapper or where the data has been input using the toolbar, it will activate a script. And the end user will be notified of the new data by some mechanism, such as a flashing icon or you've got data or whatever. So the idea of a research collaboration group is a very important one. The ability to share data between users is absolutely critical in a research laboratory. Up to now, it's been sort of fairly patchy the way this has been done. More recently, users have been sharing drives, using a shared drive, but even up to a year or two ago, that was kind of unusual. But it's certainly an important feature of the application. So we want to set a situation where users within a research group can share data in a relatively unrestricted way, although there's sort of certain sociological aspect to this where in a research lab, researchers don't always want to share data between each other for a variety of reasons. But anyway, that's something that we'll be looking at when we do field testing of this. But we will also be able to, users will also be able to invite colleagues to join their research group from remote locations as well. Data annotation is again, another very important aspect of the application. And users will be able to annotate data not only with the keyboard input into the application, but also using ink and the tablet PC interface. And we see this as sort of a very interesting and useful application of tablet PC. Data export, of course, is very important because we're dealing with a basic data that is in XML format. Reformatting that is relatively straightforward using XSL style sheets and a transformation engine. And I'm going through this quite quickly, so I do apologize, but I wanted to get through this. So there are a number of components to the other components to the Notebook project, apart from the basic development that Blair is doing. And these include the issue of internal data mapping, which is something that we're having discussions on at the Supercomputer Center. It's an issue that affects not just the Notebook application, but a bunch of projects that we deal with. So we're looking for some kind of common resolution for this. We need to create a collection of smart clients in order for us to be able to field test the application. Otherwise, we have to have something useful for a laboratory to actually test the Notebook application with. In support of these example smart clients, will create some SOAP services to support that for data and data processing. We need to create a collection of data visualization controls, for example, for viewing protein sequences, protein structures, DNA sequences, DNA alignments, that type of thing. And finally, the web integration requires us to create a toolbar for Internet Explorer and probably also Netscape, or Mozilla, if we have the resources to actually do that. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit now about what I'm going to do is demo the application as we have so far. It's in a very early stage still, but I wanted to show you this. One of the applications we've created for this has actually been created by Dr. Robert Burns. He's not unfortunately able to be with us today, but I'm actually going to talk about his work now. So microarrays, if you're not familiar with them, are a great way for analysis of large-scale gene expression, and it's absolutely revolutionized gene expression studies in the laboratory. Very briefly, DNA of known type is spotted onto a substrate. RNA from cells is hybridized to this. and then the results analyzed to determine what kind of binding has occurred, and you can tell what level of expression has happened. So the microarray analysis generates a huge amount of data, and that requires statistical analysis. And typically, the bioconductor package is widely used for actually performing this analysis. It's written in the R language. There's an R interpreter. But the current graphical user interfaces for performing this kind of analysis are actually quite crude and not very well liked. So we saw this as a good opportunity to step in, see how the notebook application could be applied to this problem. So in essence, what's happening is the microarray application runs inside the Avalon control. It makes requests to the notebook application framework for storing and retrieving data from the SQL server, and it makes direct connection with the bioconductor package. So what I'm going to show you now is not a whole lot to show you apart from a few sort of clues as to exactly what's happening, but I'm going to show you how the microarray app actually connects to bioconductor that's actually running on the PC. And in the future, we hope to create a web service for accessing and running this data.
Right, so right now, bioconductor uses it's pretty much a client-server-based app, right? It has a local stub that calls out.
No, it's actually a local application. It's just a runtime interpreter for restricting language, which is called R.
All right.
So I'm starting R now. I start. Okay. One of the sort of foibles, if you like, of the application as it currently is that it requires to be internet connected, otherwise it doesn't start up properly. Okay. Excuse me?
It's still acquiring network address. You're not connected yet. Now you are.
And you need to finish the R. You just type library.
Done. Okay, so what that did is it allows the R library to be able to connect to the application. That's a DLL, runs intermediately.
But the application will eventually be able to work offline.
The application will eventually be able to work. Yeah. Oh, yes. Sorry. Yes. Yes.
It actually works offline right now. There's just a bug in one of our
Not sure.
Okay, so down here we have a listing of the smart clients we currently have. These are test clients. If I double-click on the microarray viewer, this is the interface we're currently developing for this. So if I go ahead and load some XML data, microarray data that's in MageML format, just as an example. Okay, that populates several of the fields now, and I can go ahead and send that data to create an MRA object in the R package in bioconductor. I'll go ahead and do that. Okay, and the clue is it says data successfully loaded in bioconductor. Let's look at the output. Okay, so we've created an MRA package in bioconductor. And I think Blair will probably show you some examples using Blast. He's created a little Blast application. But this shows you that you can create an application. This is created, the interface is created using XAML as the markup. It has business code behind it that actually does the actual work. But it potentially is a very interesting one, as I say, because there's a lot of researchers who would benefit greatly from being able to persist data locally, being able to analyze it using a nice interface, which they don't currently have. Okay, so the roadmap we have for the notebook application is to first implement a set of core features that are absolutely crucial for getting the application up and running. Things such as the database integration, which is SQL Server, and the API for creating the wrappers, the interface between the network services and the application, and we have that in place. And we have a series of advanced features that we want to implement, not implemented yet, such as peer-to-peer communication, the ability to layer multiple ontologies, or to layer an ontology currently in ELF format, and then multiple ontologies to potentially perform cross-domain queries, which is a whole ballgame in itself. It's going to be fascinating if we can get that up and running. Background updates of data and the notebook runtime service. We started creating notebook applications, we call them NApps, around about October, and this was the Microarray Application. And we're hoping that this will be in a state to be used probably in the next 2 months or so in labs at UCSD. And we'll be then performing internal field testing at UCSD. At the same time, there's a cognitive science group at UCSD run by Jim Holland, who we're hoping to collaborate with to study aspects of the social aspects of the use of the application. Following this, we'll then have public beta testing and bug tracking at the same time. So, acknowledgements, all the work, as a good PI, I can talk about this stuff, and all the work's actually done by this guy over here, Blair Jennings, who's done a great job in taking this as just a concept and actually instantiating it. So, all credit to Blair. Bob Burns, unfortunately, can't be here. He was the guy who created or is creating the Microarray application. Mark Miller is co-PI on this. Dan Fay and Microsoft Research. It goes without saying this wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the support we have from you guys. Amnath Gupta is helping us greatly from the Advanced Query Lab at Supercomputer Center, where he has a lot of experience in dealing with schema mapping, and he has some very good people working for him. And also, I'm grateful for the support of the SDSC Synthesis Center as well. So that's pretty much it. Blair now is going to give you a presentation about some technical aspects of the application. I just went down. All right.
So the notebook is actually written using the 2.0 version of .NET. We're working totally in Whidbey and using the beta 1. 90% of our code is in C#. There may be some that's in VBNet. If it is, it's the third-party stuff we're using. Once we got a hold of the Avalon CTP, he played with it for a couple of weeks and then translated everything we had in Xamarin right into it. It took about a week. Mostly it was just updating to the latest APIs, because the Xamarin stuff's based on the PDC version. The reason we didn't go with Longhorn is since our platform of interest is XP, and our end users wouldn't have Longhorn, it was kind of useless. We've been using SQL Server 2005 since the first beta came out, and internally we are using the XML data type very heavily. In fact, I think we were one of the first users of it. Back at the Faculty Research Summit, I cornered a couple of the people from the SQL Server group about it and asked them some questions that they couldn't answer. So the main application is basically a data flow manager. It sits there and plays traffic top. Where does this data need to go next? Does it need to go back to the GUI, let the person do something else to it? Does it need to go to the local database? Does it have to go find some external web service or data source? That's what it does. There are two types of extension pieces to this system. There are the GUI extensions, and then there's the service wrappers. The GUI extensions, they basically can be self-contained. They don't have to interact with anything if you don't want them to, other than the main app to save data. They're written in XAML, so while it's a little problematic right now, it's actually fairly easy for the end user to basically design one fairly fast once you get used to the XML stylisms. We've implemented a standard API via interfaces that the end user just needs to implement in order to hook into our system, and we're looking at making the system or the GUI extensions updatable via a web service. The service wrappers currently deal with, or they're made to be generic, so they can talk to a web service, database, legacy apps, you name it. You can talk to it. We split them out from the GUI system so as to allow the GUI writers to use already existing services that may say that they just want to look at the data in a different way. They can write a new GUI thing and just use that service to get the data. And the other thing is, which I will talk about in a little bit, we're moving from using straight XML to a standardized data format internally. And these service wrappers will basically turn into a data translator system also. I have a couple of ideas on how to make it so all they do is implement one thing, if even that, to do it. Our collaboration service idea, the P2P system, is based on, it's got more in tune with a Nutella system, no centralized server or anything. They just go out and find their peers. It's going to allow, as Craig indicated, it's basically going to be a distributed search mechanism. The biggest piece, or the piece that has the biggest impact to the application, is what we're calling our Ontology subsystem. This system basically allows, or will allow us to generalize what the data is. So if you have data for, or say I'm the end user and I'm looking for blast data, this system has the ability to basically say this is DNA data. But depending on which blast service you use, you may get it in multiple formats. So trying to bring those together in one application can be problematic. So what we are doing is we're turning our current XML-based system into a canonical data format structure. So it's a static data structure that everything will be living in. So all you need to know basically is what I'm looking for data type X. It gives it to you, and you basically just parse the data format and get the data you want out. And you don't even have to care about what format it came in originally. That would make it easier for the GUI writers to write their GUIs for all the different data types. They don't have to know, well, this blast came in XML and that came in ASM. How do I deal with each? It gets rid of having to do a lot of the text parsing. Actually, I kind of already went over this on the last. So this canonical data format has been designed to allow us to basically decompose XML. But as we've been playing with it, we've found we've actually been able to deal with a lot of the semi-structured data formats, CSV files, Excel files, those kind of things, which actually makes our lives a lot easier, because all we do is take our translator, give it the new format system, and it basically gives us our standardized structure. It has also been designed to be serializable to XML and SOAP, so that we can then use it to translate the data from one machine to another within our P2P system. We don't have to do any strange type manipulations or anything like that, or try to figure out if this machine knows what kind of data that machine is trying to give it. It makes our lives a lot easier on the P2P stuff. The early version of our collaboration system is basically using a channel system to find all the peers. Everybody subscribes to a channel sync. We have added in the ability to manually override that channel to allow external users to come in and add their data to it. So if you have a collaboration in the UK, you can actually let your collaborators come in and add their data in. Currently, we're just using it or playing with it as an updating service, but it can easily be instituted to do notifications. So say your collaborator in the UK notices you're online, he can notify you and go, hey, you want to do an IM and talk about what we're doing right now, that kind of thing. And then it is totally hooked into the Ontology subsystem, so that it can keep context for the data that it's translating. That is so that we don't end up having strange orphan data in interesting places. And that's basically it. That's not something. This region right here is an element host, and basically what we feed it is the compiled BAML system, which these smart clients, they're actually, the way the system finds them is in order to implement one of these XAML controls, you have to put the XAML and the back-end DLL in the main app system. This thing looks for the XAML. It actually picks up the XAML and parses it for internal hidden data. And that is how it actually figures out these names. It also does some versioning, and it finds any dependencies that the system needs. This is actually two XAML controls. It's actually this Entrez searcher and the sequence viewer. This is the Entrez searcher, and that is the sequence viewer. Basically, the sequence viewer is just a text viewer. It knows how to format things. That's pretty much all it does. What I just did is I just fired off a search using this search term into the Entrez database system, and it's taking longer than normal. Hit the wrong button. Sorry. Yeah, it's connected.
Don't feel bad. Died like 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
if it had worked, you would start to see a list of abstracts to fetch here, and there they are. Just took it a while. Antres must be heavily used right now. So you can see that these two systems, or components, they do not know anything of each other. This one just knows that it needs to have this one around in order to show the data you get here. So what I could do is, this list, I could actually select a couple of these and fetch, and it'll come up slightly formatted in this one. I'm still playing with how Avalon formats data text. I haven't had a lot of time to figure a lot of that out. It's a very complex API in there. But the point that I wanted to get across is that this system, being this extendable and it being able to actually combine different disparate components, actually makes it very powerful to do very complex UIs. So now what I've done is I've cleared out that and just brought in the sequence viewer, and I loaded in some already saved data. This is a protein alignment that the sequence viewer has basically loaded to show that you don't have to use multiples, you can just use one. It just, basically the system is extendable enough to allow you to fully develop your own application without having major connections to each other. So you could actually literally write a bunch of minor components here, each doing a specific thing, and then lock them together later. You figure out you need the full functionality. That's all. Any questions?
I have a couple. First off, what can we do to help make this project more valuable to the scientific community? And, you know, I've got a specific thing there. One of the things that Dan had been working on for the last couple of years was working with folks to get large data sets, web services enabled, for lack of a better description.
Yeah.
You know, is there a set of databases relevant to this project that, were they available with web services interfaces, would make your job easier, make the tool more valuable?
A lot of the databases that we're currently looking at are already been web service enabled. The only problem with them is they're typically Java, and we have some incompatibilities on the SOAP side. But that's not your problem. That's the guy who implemented it.
One of the things that we've been supported with is a huge server and a huge, larger amount of space for the SQL server. So that's one of the things we're going to be setting up with some large data sets. We're really just testing this out during the testing phase. So that's not really an issue at the moment. It would be great if there were more genuine services online via web services, so things that actually do things to data. That generally speaking, there's actually very few of those reliably up there.
Most of the web services we're working against, they're more of a REST style rather than SOAP service. So you get straight XML out of them. The biggest help that I can see from Microsoft, let me talk to some of the Avalon guys. Trying to figure out that API has gotten to be a bit of a headache because it's just so big.
And a couple of other things we've been discussing about, like the annotation engine. How do we do that? Because that's a key part going forward. Also, the kind of the social aspect, because Greg didn't really get into it, but between these scientists, there's issues of not just collaboration, but also competition. So you may not want to always share everything in an open manner. You may want to share some and things. And so how do you deal with those issues that you don't really discover until you're in the process of doing it? But how do you make sure the hooks are there? So those are a couple of them. And the other one was, in fact, UI type ideas. You know, how do we make it more appealing to the scientists? How do we make it more usable? How do we, in fact, bring in things like even gaming interfaces and things like that? How do you make it?
Yeah, well, some of the visual components we need to do, they need 3D abilities, and actually that's my biggest problem right now is trying to figure out the 3D API for Avalon. It's just too complex, and I have to admit I'm not a good 3D programmer. My specialty is actually backends, distributed systems, not really the GUIs, but that's what I got to do here.
Yeah. Well, do you want to produce the 3D component, or do you simply want to be able to call some 3D application or
we want to be able to host a couple of 3D components in that GUI, or the user-defined area.
Okay.
A good example of that is a 3D protein viewer.
I mean, typically the initial sort of application use 3D protein structure it would be a really cool thing to be able to present to an end user. So we're looking at sort of various ways of holding together code that has from other sources, legacy code type things, and being able to import that as a data visualization component.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
So you're very centered around everybody having their own personal database. There's two things that I'm curious about. One is, do you anticipate any kind of size problems? I don't have a good picture of how much you're storing, but I mean, one thing I'm seeing sort of in the HPC space in general is an explosion of data, right? And there's a success disaster in some sense waiting.
There's a difference between what the data we're looking at is well filtered. So you have your major.
I completely understand that, but I could imagine that even your filtered data might end up being large, and so that's really, in a sense, what my question is. When you think out 5 years, let's suppose you're wildly successful with this thing. Do you anticipate that in 5 years data is going to explode, or is that the wrong model to think about for this?
You mean data storage or data?
Yeah, I mean it's sort of.
It's definitely a valid question, and I see both sides of it. I used to be a biological chemist and doing a lot of HTS work before, and while HTS tends to be a lot of data, usually isn't very big, disk size wise, and so I don't see a big problem, especially with the sizes of hard drives and how cheap they're getting. It's too easy to put a 300 gig drive in a box and let it. Yeah.
So you're just purely talking about this space, and you're talking about other aspects such as how the database can handle it.
Well, I wanted to get a sense of whether 5 or 10 years down the road you're going to be saying, gee, we need to move beyond a personal database to having like partial replication or more complicated storage stories, because right now it feels like you're sort of saying, I'm going to make my copy on my personal database and play in my lovely world, and that works great as long as my single machine can handle it.
The bigger issue actually is this is aimed towards academic labs, and they typically don't have a server system. They're just a bunch of desktops and laptops, and the biggest database that any of these people use is Access, and that's what they do all their work in. If they even use Access, a lot of them use Excel exclusively. And we're trying to get them out of that paradigm to make it more accessible to everyone, because trying to get the data out of an Excel spreadsheet is damn hard.
There's no limitation in the architecture to say the wrappers that you guys have, the data has to be locally. It can be remotely.
It can be
I can easily imagine how to express this transparently, but I was sort of, as a person who's interested in storage and stuff like that, I'm curious to understand, what should I be thinking about down the road? And it's the model that you guys are going to be
The
facing.
model, at least for the short term, is local, but it's very, very easy for us to turn that into a remote database, because we actually deal with the database in a disconnected manner. We try and not even know that where the database is. That way, when we hit the size issues, we can shove it off to a major server and just say, hey, the connection's over there, where it was right there.
Okay. And the second question I had was, how difficult did you find dealing with things like databases as part of the system? I mean, one thing I've noticed is some people who've tried to use relational databases to store their stuff try it, throw their hands up and say, we couldn't get to work, or it was too slow, or something like that, and this is just not ready for prime time. So
I've been dealing with databases for over 10 years. Everything from SQL Server to Oracle to Access to a couple other ones that you probably never heard of. And actually, dealing with SQL Server is the easiest one I've ever worked with, especially with the new data set model. It's almost too easy to fill a data set and basically ignore that the database exists.
So it sounds like, I don't want to monopolize the questions, I'm kind of working through my list. Has anybody else got?
We also have one more.
Yeah.
We have to let Mark finish also.
Yeah. So you have sounds like two dependencies, Whitby and the Avalon XAML control. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
You were using. Do we have a redistribution? Any redistribution issues if they decide to make, when you open this testing the software outside of SDSC?
We actually made it so that we can swap Avalon in and out for the XAML component.
Right.
So Avalon's only partially a dependency.
Okay.
Our biggest dependency is SQL Server. Can't do anything without it.
Would your preference be to be able to redistribute the Avalon control?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Is that something you can follow up with, Dan?
Yeah, I'm sure
I'm sorry, I kind of zoned out for a portion of that. You were talking about including the active state Perl scripting engine and parsing. For data. Have you looked at using, Excel has some pretty extensive data parsing capabilities. And you can, include it as an ActiveX control. I just wondered if, instead of forcing people to write scripts, if they can just use the native Excel.
Yeah, but the Perl scripts, the thing is that Perl is such a universal language. I pick any guy off the street as putting it.
For programmers. Okay. Two different audiences. So I've got the ones who know how to write Perl scripts, and we got the kind who know how to use Excel, which it sounds like is a large portion of your, potentially of your target audience.
Absolutely, but still there's a sort of a clique of programmers who haven't been exposed to Excel but know Perl backwards. And if I say to those guys, write me a parser for a web page, they can do it in 2 seconds. I say, this is how you.
It wasn't an either/or question. Sorry. If I didn't mean to suggest that I was Excel as a replacement for the Perl scripting. I was looking at it as
I appreciate that.
A course you mentioned. Is this being used in any courses today?
So what we have here is a very early stage of development, and it needs to progress probably about another 2 months before we're in a stage where we can think about field testing it. And at that point we'll have at least 2 or 3 decent smart clients for it that users can use. And we've identified the labs that we're going to be collaborating with, and we want to get these sort of sociological aspects of this also monitored at the same time. So I'd say we're about probably about 2 months away. But then I said that November as well. So
actually, I've got the early press release, which will push it back even further, but that's okay. Those are my questions. Thanks.
Yeah.
Now that's better.
This is kind of a high-level presentation of the next stage. Like Greg and Blair have developed what looks to be a really nice platform upon which other things can be inserted. And I am more a biologist than a programmer, but I'm in charge of some particular projects that have a great use for the kind of platform that they're developing. And my job is to sort of represent the interests of the biologists in these projects. So let me just quickly say, we're interested in biodiversity. First of all, you think of biodiversity as characterizing where everything is in the world, both geographically and in time, and that's just the starting point. That kind of information is used to make policy decisions that has global impact. What is the sustainability of species populations? What are the threats from invasive species? What about SARS? Where do civet cats and people intersect? Where are these things going to happen? We need tools to identify where things are in space and how they're changing with time. And oops. And if we're going to make huge policy decisions that have to do with the quality of life on Earth, we really ought to be collecting this data in the most error-free way we can. And right now we're collecting it in the field with pencil and then re-entering that data as biodiversity informatics emerges, people are still entering data into databases by hand, and we want to minimize the human involvement in that because that's both the most time-consuming and therefore expensive step and the most error-prone. Okay, so and here's a case in point. This figure comes from a paper where they've looked at Mexican terrestrial species that were misidentified, and you can see, the problem here. If you do it by hand, you're going to have this kind of problem. And these are not the worst problem. You can see immediately there's an error there. But what about these? These are all wrong too, but they're still in Mexico. So, you really don't want to have to go through and sort that all out. So, I mean, there's a really simple. Sorry.
Misidentification. Can you explain a little bit more about what the?
What I'm talking about?
What do you mean?
This is where they located the plant.
Location,
this is
not identification.
Sorry. Yes. Okay. So the location is just incorrectly recorded. Okay. So they're all over the world, and we want to stop that. And so.
We don't know if that was actually misrecorded or misentered, right?
Yes, exactly. So there's just a bunch of steps there we'd like to eliminate, and of course, we already have a solution for that. I mean, there are field devices now that you can use that'll tell you where you are, and all you need to do is create software for these people so you can stamp your sample as you're there with the location. Okay? And that's just one of the kinds of problems that exist in collecting data this way. If you can capture the data in real time and put it into a database, along with data from other data providers, the historical data about that species and that location and that time, integrate it with information about climate or rainfall or geology. You can begin to integrate all those kinds of data together. So while you're in the field, as you're collecting samples, you can evaluate how you're doing. Where do I want to look for more samples? Can I share with the people who I can't see any longer, but they're somewhere in range, what I've found? So all these kinds of issues could be very useful to people who are out evaluating the status of biodiversity. And the kinds of uses that we envision here then are taking this field device. I think Greg mentioned this. You can take a field device that's fairly robust. You can have a base station somewhere in your tent or in your Jeep. And then, of course, with connectivity, you can reach out to the global data providers or an archival database that's somewhere in a central location if you want one. You can have peer-to-peer communication. And then you can address, you find something, report it back as data and location, and you can go out to your global providers for what they call voucher authority, and that's identification. I say this is Libistis reticulatus, why do you think it's that? And the voucher authority says, well, we agree with you. This is why we think it's that species. And there's a lot of things that could be developed for evaluating in the field and confirming species identity that people have talked about. And the kinds of software we'd like to investigate are things that'll help with that. And I don't even fully know what all the issues are there in terms of identifying things in the field, but people have talked about evaluating things chemically in the field with remote sensors, and so you could do a species analysis and then relate it back to some voucher authority. So all these things are possible as sensors and equipment becomes more and more portable, and wireless communication. All these things become very conceivable. So, God, I can't get this right. Okay, so and another issue that I mentioned already is species prediction. You can collect your data and ask, as you're ongoing with your investigation, rather than going back to the lab and saying, oh, I wish I'd collected 4 more. Do I have enough specimens here? Do I believe the data I'm getting relative to everything else that exists? Where should I look nearby to collect more specimens or to discover new species? All of those things could be very useful. And the reason we chose biodiversity is it's particularly interesting to me, I think, but also at SDSC there are a number of ongoing projects. So if you look at the core notebook platform that Greg's already described, it's a very modular situation, and then we can add these things shown in yellow, which are domain specific, and they wouldn't have to be biodiversity, obviously. I could name off probably 5 off the top of my head that would have similar things where you would have domain-specific issues. And the key thing here, I think the 100-pound or the 800-pound gorillas are like domain ontology. There's the whole idea of how to organize the data so we can ask the right kinds of questions of it. And each domain is going to have its own unique issues there and its own unique kinds of questions they want to ask of their data. And then domain-specific software modules for the kinds of analysis, like in this environment, what kind of species am I likely to find? Those are the particular ones for biodiversity. Okay, so so that would all be built on the features of the notebook as a point of departure. And then also at SDSC, we have the Geon project, which is a geology project, the SEEK, which is an ecology project, the Cypress project, which is infrastructure for phylogenetic research, and Kepler, which is a workflow, a lively workflow effort aimed at linking different tasks together so you can pipeline data through a whole series of analytical tools. So these projects all sort of resonate with this idea of the field notebook, and it creates a source of expertise in terms of how we connect to the world, which again, in the global effort, there's a large encyclopedia of life effort, which is aimed towards characterizing all global species. Species 2000 is a similar effort. This is a data integration effort called Digger, which is aimed specifically at biodiversity data. And this is a large organization also aimed at spawning efforts to integrate and make interoperable tools about biodiversity. And then you can go even further to amateur efforts, which are like the bird surveys that people do. And you could take this as a portable, tool. You could take it all the way to a Peterson's Guide kind of thing, where you have a wildlife tool, something that you could subscribe to and update. So there's a lot of different possibilities. Or when they do the bird surveys, they could enter into some global database if they had some kind of authentication that they were approved to do this kind of entry. So anyway, there's a large number of sort of related efforts going on here. And we've looked at the different kinds of hardware options. This is something we need to resolve in conversation with the users who would actually go out in the field and collect the data, which none of us actually are, but these things are improving so quickly now in terms of memory and in terms of battery life. So the kinds of hardware options we're thinking about, like the small tablet PC, PDAs, Blackberries, some combination thereof, as shown in the pictures that I already went through. And then in terms of concern about battery life in the field, there's both, ever improving chips that consume less power. There's some due to be released soon that cut the power requirement about in half. And then there's talk of the imminent release of these methanol fuel cells for powering things out in the field, so you can run your PDA. Basically, as long as you've got methanol, you're in business. So all of these things make this kind of field collection possible, and it's easy to see how you could go from here to archaeology to paleontology. There's a lot of different kinds of field science where collecting data and images in the field could be very useful. Okay, and the challenges, the main challenge, I think, is ontology development, which I've already talked about, and then adapting the existing tools that we have to degrade gracefully into these smaller hardware devices, and then I'm sure they'll continue to improve and be able to handle more and more kinds of calculations. This is the one I most worry about, staying abreast of user needs and any access we have to your usability people for advice on this. I think this is the most important thing in whether we succeed or fail on this. Okay, and then the right combinations of hardware so people in the field, both those are related to users. What do users need in the field to do their work? Right now we've submitted a grant to the National Science Foundation for funding for this as a collaboration between the Smithsonian and the Pinhead, which is in Colorado, and SDSC, to engineer the kinds of, to adapt the software that Greg's developed and to identify the kinds of hardware that people need. And I think a significant amount of this will be, users at the Smithsonian who take it out into the field and look at it and say, this is what we actually need, and then try it and say, well, we thought we needed that, but we need this. So that whole user interaction thing, we need to learn how to do that well to succeed. So that's really the whole overview of the field notebook. Questions?
I would think that for each survey you'd need a different set of questions or fields. Have you thought about how that would be customized?
I think there has to be some ability for users to sort of adapt their own. I mean, that's been the hallmark, I think, of everything we're doing is make it flexible so users can create their own interfaces, and create their own kinds of queries for their community. Because we can't scale to that,
Right.
So I think, but hopefully the stuff that's why I think ontology is a big issue, and what Blair's talking about, how we store all that data, making it incredibly flexible in hopes that people can sort out that part of it as we go.
Well, thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to go over the chat. Oh, I think that worked. Nice to see you.